Hello and welcome to the Moonshots Podcast. It's a very special episode 36. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, and as always, I'm joined by the man from Brooklyn himself, Mr. Chad Owen.
Good evening, Mike.
I would say good morning to you in a beautiful sunrise across that Manhattan skyline. Chad, this is the first time this show. This is a very, very special type of episode. Why don't you tell our awesome audience what we have in store for them today?
Yeah. So if you're just jumping into the Moonshots podcast feed, you're actually jumping into the second episode on a singular individual. It's the first time we've had to split up an episode, but you won't be surprised to learn that Steve Jobs warrants us taking the time, over the course of two shows to go through. We've got at least 24 clips between the two shows here.
I think the big secret here, Chad, is we've probably got 3 or 4 shows, don't you think?
I'm sure that we will be revisiting Steve and wisdom that he's dropped at some point in the future.
Yeah.
In addition to everything that we've discussed on the last show and have yet to discuss on this show. But so before we kind of do a little bit of a recap and get into the clips, last show we talked a little bit kind of the beginnings and the history of Apple and some of the kind of tactical business activities and strategies. What have we got on today's show, Mike?
Well, I think this is a beautiful companion to the previous show because I think we're going to get into sort of the thinking and the philosophies that Steve brought to both Apple and Pixar. And I think what comes out of that was some very special approaches to creating really breakthrough products and services. And I want to remind people that it was, the iPod, iTunes, the iPhone, the iPad, and all of that at Apple. But what is so exceptional about Steve is there was Pixar as well. And the
Apple II and the Macintosh.
It goes on and on. But the truth being that even if you were to judge Steve just by either his accomplishments with Pixar or Apple, either way you cut it, it's great. But the fact that one human was in 2 places at the same time doing all this magic is truly exceptional. And I think, it was a testament to the ad campaign that they had to think different. This was really what we learned in the previous show, that there were these great stories of how he completely outfoxed Disney for Pixar, how he outfoxed IBM on Apple's behalf. I mean, it was just really phenomenal. And we heard gushing praises from everyone who's worth something in tech. They really did see him as not only one of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time, but maybe ever. Just in my research, Chad, I didn't actually get this clip in to any of our shows, but just as an offhand comment, Mark Andreessen, who is featured in our show, and he's one of the greatest tech investors in Silicon Valley. He says, look, I meet about 1,500 founders a year. And he said 9 out of 10 say that their inspiration for creating a company was Steve Jobs. Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah, I think I'm a little overwhelmed at the number of clips and the amount of wisdom that we're getting from Steve. And I would actually just encourage you, the listener, to pick 1 or 2 that resonate most for you and what you're working on right now. That's kind of what I had done with the last show, and I'm sure I'll end up with this show. There's just, because he talks about so many different areas, both of business and creativity and innovation, it might be hard to choose just one, but yeah, I think by the end, hopefully you'll have some favorites.
Of course. And I think we would encourage everyone to check out our site, moonshots.io, because there you can get all the show notes, links, references, follow-up material, all sorts of good stuff. But I think we're ready to have a different kind of introduction to the last show. The last one was great. We had Steve himself reading the Apple campaign manifesto for the crazy ones. This time, we're going to get a bit of a smorgasbord, a bit of a showcase of what he accomplished in a lifetime. So let's get our minds ready for the life of Steve Jobs.
There is not a single executive or creator in the technology industry more important than Steve Jobs.
Born in San Francisco, California on February 24th, 1955, Stephen Paul was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs shortly after birth.
Steve showed a lot of interest in electronics at a young age because his family had moved to Los Altos, California. You had Hewlett-Packard around there, you had other emerging companies, and so he was thrown into this mix.
During high school, Jobs met Steve Wozniak, and the two were hired during summers at Hewlett-Packard. Later, Jobs dropped out of college, but informally continued his education.
He wasn't a geek from early on, although he certainly had a high technical expertise. He needed a partner like Steve Wozniak to bring that element to it. But in terms of developing himself, he had interests in art and history in all kinds of areas that are highly unusual for someone in his field.
In 1976, Jobs and Wozniak started Apple Computers from the Jobs family garage. And with the Apple II, they found success.
The Apple I computer didn't sell very well. It wasn't really a functional computer that demonstrated a true capability for personal computing. But what they did is they designed the Apple II. That became extremely popular, and within a few years, they were selling over $100 million worth of computers.
Apple went public on December 12, 1980, with a value of $1.2 billion its first day, but in the next few years lost its market share to IBM. By 1985, Apple forced Jobs to resign.
When Steve Jobs was pushed out of Apple, he picked himself up again pretty quickly. He grabbed the people he wanted to be involved in his new company, which was called Next, and they started about building the new company.
Jobs purchased a Lucasfilm graphics division, renamed Pixar in 1986, and worked as the company's CEO while still actively developing his computer company Next.
Next computer was the underpinnings of what was coming next at Apple. Everything that went on at Apple, including the operating system, including the design, had its origins in Next.
Apple purchased Next in 1996 and eventually returned Jobs to CEO. His software, called Next Step, evolved into Mac OS X, which led the Apple technology revolution.
The iPhone is the single most important device of the modern era. It is the smartphone, which is this all-in-one device. And so it's conceptually, the iPod to the iPhone to the iPad to what's next has been the most important trend in technology.
What Apple really has done has raised the world's awareness of design and functionality. People look at these things and they just have to have them. And once they have them, they love them.
In 2011, Forbes magazine named Apple the most valuable company in the world. That same year, Jobs resigned as CEO. And on October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs died due to complications from pancreatic cancer.
I think Steve Jobs' legacy will be here for a very, very long time. It'll be there at Apple, it'll be at other companies. His legacy is not just the way he ran Apple or the way he developed products. It's a whole slew of different things that he was able to do so effectively that have changed our lives forever.
Yeah, the timeline's so interesting. For maybe some of you younger listeners, you may not remember that Steve Jobs wasn't the CEO of Apple for 10 years, and that he, went on to found a small little movie production animation studio called Pixar, which actually IPO'd at a higher valuation than Apple's IPO in 1980. I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah, and in the same year, the year that Pixar listed was the same year that Netscape listed, and it was valued higher than Netscape, one of the biggest IPOs. And what back in the day, and now I'm showing my age, is that when Netscape went IPO, that was the beginning of the first internet bubble. So that's how prolific it was. And in the midst of all of this, let's just remember, he was an amazing CEO at not only Apple, but Pixar. But in order to get there, his path was actually getting fired. A founder got fired by one of his employees who convinced the board to fire Steve. Like, that is such a twist.
Yeah, but he shrugs it off and founds two companies, Next and Pixar, one that goes on to become the behemoth of animation that it is today.
And there's this pattern to both Pixar and Apple where they seem to have been working on something that turns out to be a brilliant prediction of what's to come. They always you think about it now. Animated films, animated feature films, they're launched all the time, but Pixar were the first and they saw something coming, so they built the technology. We take smartphones for granted, and there are successful companies now who are literally built on the principle of mobile first, and that starts 2007, iPhone, game changer. And the crazy thing is that they really seem, when you put Pixar and Apple together, one of the big themes here is that they are prescient. They seem to have the ability to be in the right place at the right time. And I think this first clip is really insightful when we listen to Steve telling us about how to have the courage to bet on something big for the future.
Apple is a company that doesn't have the most resources of everybody in the world. And the way we've succeeded is by choosing what horses to ride really carefully, technically. We try to look for these technical vectors that have a future and that are headed up. And, technology, different pieces of technology kind of go in cycles. They have their springs and summers and autumns, and then they, go to the graveyard of technology. And so we try to pick things that are in their springs. And if you choose wisely, you can save yourself an enormous amount of work versus trying to do everything. And you can really put energy into making those new emerging technologies be great on your platform, rather than just okay because you're spreading yourself too thin. So we have a history of doing that. As an example, we went from the 5-inch floppy disk to the 3.5-inch floppy disk with the Mac.
Before other people, right?
We were the first to do that. We made the 3.5-inch floppy disk popular. Sony invented it, and we put it in the first products. And there were some good reasons we did that. We got rid of the floppy disk altogether in 1998 with the first iMac. We also got rid of these things called serial and parallel ports, and we were the first to adopt USB, even though Intel had invented it. You first saw it in mass on iMacs. And so we have gotten rid of things. We were one of the first to get rid of optical drives with the MacBook Air. And I think things are moving in that direction as well. And sometimes when we get rid of things like the floppy disk drive on the original iMac, people call us crazy.
Or at least premature, maybe.
No, they call us crazy.
Oh, okay.
But sometimes you just have to pick the things that look like they're going to be the right horses to ride going forward. And
what if people say, the iPad is crippled in this respect?
Well, I'd say two things. Number one, things are packages of emphasis. Some things are emphasized in a product, some things are not done as well in a product, some things are chosen not to be done at all in a product. And so different people make different choices. And if the market tells us we're making the wrong choices, we listen to the market. We're just people running this company. We're trying to make great products for people. And so we have at least the courage of our convictions to say, we don't think this is part of what makes a great product. We're going to leave it out. Some people are going to not like that. They're going to call us names. It's not going to be in certain companies' vested interests that we do that, but we're going to take the heat because we want to make the best product in the world for customers. And we're going to instead focus our energy on these technologies, which we think are in their ascendancy and we think are going to be the right technologies for customers. And you know what? They're paying us to make those choices. That's what a lot of customers pay us to do, is to try to make the best products we can. And if we succeed, they'll buy them. And if we don't, they won't. And it'll all work itself out.
I know that clip is a little old, Mike, but I mean, it's almost as if he could be saying the same thing today, right? No headphone port?
Yeah,
What?
totally.
Proprietary charging port? What?
I do you remember the serial and parallel at the back of your computer? I remember those days. Like it was, oh my gosh. And sometimes we hate them a bit for it. I'm sitting here and I've got because I got a brand new MacBook Pro. I've got one of those funny USB-C adapters to fit all the things that have the old USB, and I'm like cursing them because like, why would you build a product that forces me to buy an accessory because you don't have the right ports? But I love these packages of emphasis and the courages of conviction. They make a call and they go for it. And he's like, I don't know why everyone hates us, because in the end, if you don't want it, don't buy it. And if you like it, buy it, and everything will work itself out. It's quite funny, but in the end, what for me is a learning in this is, know your business and have the courage of your convictions. Don't hedge. Go, get all in on what you believe in. And I think his success only goes to prove to us that really works. You can't win being half pregnant. You just got to get all in.
Yeah. Well, I think I loved when he said customers pay us to make these sorts of decisions. And I think that's actually a really interesting way for him, to view the market and his customers, because I think at the end of the day, people and pop culture kind of look to Apple as a tastemaker. Across kind of all categories, both in design and now, music and the arts and everything. I actually think Steve Jobs is quite right there in that he really set a direction for Apple to be a very focused technology company. And as you said, use the courage of their convictions to make some hard decisions and alienate some people. He's quite right. Like if you want 16 USB ports and your serial port and your floppy disks, like get a PC, but it's just not going to be as elegant and useful and kind of purposeful as a Macintosh would be, or an iMac, or, the products that they're making today. So while I understand the criticism of Apple getting rid of these ports and making things difficult, I think it's well within their design philosophy of we're getting hyper-focused on our products. We're betting on what we believe is going to be the future technologies and technologies that are on their ascendancy, not on their way out, right? Like, how long has just regular USB been around? Like forever. So like
exactly.
So like, they're placing big bets on the future. And, at this point, they're a large enough company where they have, I think, an outsized weight and influence on, what the future technologies will be. So I think it's just very interesting that he's like, what, customers are going to go elsewhere if they don't want it, but they pay us to make these decisions. It's kind of baked into the business model.
It is. And it reminds me a lot of Jeff Bezos, actually. Bezos has this quote like, if you never want to be criticized, for goodness sake, don't do anything new. And this is where there's like this direct bridge between these two very different entrepreneurs. But I think the lesson is the same. And I mean, I just think when you want to push things forward, you've got to be prepared to get a little bit of heat, but you've got to stay the course. You've got to, keep to your convictions. And it's the companies that do that win, because they're often pushing against the status quo or conventional thinking. And I think as any entrepreneur, when they bring something to market, it has to be a radically different approach to solving a big problem. And I think we're learning from Steve here is just have the courage of your convictions and go out and do that. And I think it's such a powerful way to start thinking about products. But what's interesting is that I think Steve has so much more to offer us here. I think one of the things that, I don't know, do you notice this every time he speaks on a topic? Have you noticed that he has a command? He has almost like a thoughtfulness, Chad, on the topics he talks about that is quite exceptional. I mean, it's like he has thought a lot about the things he has to say. You never feel like he's riffing, do you? And off the cuff.
No,
he's digging in deep and pulling out some really big thoughts.
Yeah, and many of these innovations just simply take time. If he's going to, and the team at Apple is going to find those technologies that are in their spring and place those bets, they need to take the time to research and develop and prototype. He founded Pixar in 1986. I don't think Toy Story came out until like 1994, maybe 1995. Wow. So like there was almost 10 years of research and development to get Toy Story onto the screen. And we have a great clip here from Steve, really just talking about his philosophy for this deep thinking that you're speaking about, Mike. So here's Steve on deep thinking and the value in asking why.
Throughout the years in business, I found something, which was I'd always ask why you do things. And the answers you invariably get are, oh, that's just the way it's done. Nobody knows why they do what they do. Nobody thinks about things very deeply in business. That's what I found. I'll give you an example. When we were building our Apple I's in the garage, we knew exactly what they cost. When we got into a factory in the Apple II days, the accounting had this notion of a standard cost, where you'd kind of set a standard cost and then at the end of a quarter you'd adjust it with a variance. And I kept asking, well, why do we do this? And the answer was, well, that's just the way it's done. And after about 6 months of digging into this, what I realized was the reason you do it is because you don't really have good enough controls to know how much it costs, so you guess, and then you fix your guess at the end of the quarter. And the reason you don't know how much it costs is because your information systems aren't good enough. But nobody said it that way. And so later on, when we designed this automated factory for Macintosh, we were able to get rid of a lot of these antiquated concepts and know exactly what something cost to the second. So in business, a lot of things I call it folklore. They're done because they were done yesterday and the day before. And so what that means is if you're willing to sort of ask a lot of questions and think about things and work really hard, you can learn business pretty fast. It's not the hardest thing in the world.
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science, no.
Not rocket science. Yeah, there's like this almost folksy nature to how he sees business, isn't there, Chad?
I think he does a little bit of a disservice just saying, oh yeah, like you can study it and like make it happen. Like, I'm sorry, Steve, but not everyone can just do that and found companies like Apple and Pixar.
Yeah, the normal Joe might need a little bit more homework than that.
Yeah, but I think his admonition to us to question the way things have been done in the past, that is a trait throughout every single person that we have profiled here, from Jack Ma to Bill Belichick to Lady Gaga to Martha Stewart. The healthy questioning of the way things have been done before. I mean, how else are you going to get to innovation? If innovation is something new and novel that creates a positive change in the world, that's my own personal definition of innovation. You have to question what's come before in order to create something new. So I think while he writes off how easy it is to learn business, I do think that asking why and questioning the way things have been done in the past is very effective. And it can be for something as boring as accounting costs for manufacturing a computer. I think the fact that someone like Steve Jobs is questioning something in that minute detail really just tells you how obsessive he is in asking why and doing this deep thinking.
Yeah, and just to take a tangent just for a moment here, you'll remember that Simon Sinek really transformed a lot of creative industries by his book Start With Why. And do you remember he had a famous YouTube clip and he told his whole why framework with one example? And do you remember which company was the example? It was Apple.
I feel like that was a leading question.
It was Apple. So asking why is not only something that worked for Steve, but this whole paradigm of people are moved not by what you do, but far more so how you do it and why you do it. So mission and vision are particularly important in a world where there's so many copycat products. Why is it that Warby Parker continues to thrive despite its competitors, Airbnb, and so on and so forth? It's because they have greater missions that build affinity and give people a sense of purpose when they participate with your products and with your brand. And I think no company, maybe Nike, but Nike and Apple are alone in the universe for brands that make people feel better, for being part of the experiences, participating in the services, using the products. And this all comes from that central thought that starts with their products. And they ask, why is it done this way? How can it be done better? What would be a radically better way? But you can't get away with just asking why. And I think what's so powerful about Steve is what he pointed out in that earlier clip chat, I think is something very important for us, is they make big bets on the future and they have the courage to follow through their convictions. But there's a little nuance here. And this next clip, Steve starts to touch on this idea of focus and how we can actually gain focus and the role that has to play in creating breakthrough new products. So let's have a listen to Steve Jobs.
Apple suffered for several years from lousy engineering management. I have to say it. And there were people that were going off in 18 different directions, doing arguably interesting things in each one of them. Good engineers, lousy management. And what happened was you look at the farm that's been created with all these different animals going in different directions, and it doesn't add up. The total is less than the sum of the parts. And so we had to decide what are the fundamental directions we're going in and what makes sense and what doesn't. And there were a bunch of things that didn't. And microcosmically they might have made sense, macrocosmically they made no sense. And the hardest thing is, when you think about focusing, right? You think, well, focusing is saying yes, no. Focusing is about saying no.
I think that is enough for us. Like, focusing is saying no. I think we can just take that advice and run with it.
Oh my gosh. Like, saying no is such a liberating thing. And I think a lot of companies find themselves in trouble for trying to do too much. And I would say this is a parallel to what we see in products trying to do too much, right?
Yeah. And paradoxically, it's kind of antithetical to this idea of entrepreneurship and innovation and ingenuity. But I think this is how Steve kind of bridles his genius, is in this focus of saying no, because I'm sure he had so many more ideas than what we've actually seen turn into products and services.
Yeah.
So it's actually by putting that filter damper on it that we're actually able to get the things that we've seen. I mean, I need to take this advice. Like this, the focus is saying no, I think is something that all of us that are starting our companies, building our products. Yeah, it's just, we don't do it enough.
Exactly. And you'll remember that we were talking about, do you remember I was telling you the story of the peanut butter manifesto at Yahoo and how they had spread themselves, too wide, that there wasn't enough peanut butter to cover the whole sandwich and there were weaknesses appearing and so forth. I think this is really good. I mean, actually, this whole idea of focus, setting priorities is one thing, but it's reducing it down to just a few and doing them exceptionally well. And how many times do you see companies getting into businesses and you think, why are they doing that? Or products, the new product comes out and it does all these other things at the sacrifice of the functionalities that they should have stuck to. And I mean, a case in point for me would be if you take the Amazon Kindle. What a great example of just focus and saying no. If I look at the iPad, I think they have never, ever fallen off their focus of what a great consumption device with a light bit of input that has a real reason for being. And I can tell you, I was very skeptical when the iPad came out. I couldn't see the use case. And Chad, right now, I use this thing every single day for work, for personal use. And again, my thing here is they had they bet on the future, they'd thought deeply about it, and then once they had made their choices, boy, they kind of grasp onto them with an iron fist and don't let go. And I think that's very powerful for anyone building a product or building a company. Hold on to it and don't be distracted, because if there was ever a time in the world where there's distractions, it's now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's certainly kind of for the solo entrepreneurs and solo founders out there. I don't think you can have priorities. I think you have one priority. And that's what I'm taking away kind of from this message from Steve. I mean, you know, when he was working at Apple, there were many different teams across many categories, you know, like the pro line of hardware and pro software and consumer software. And so I think each of those business units probably only had one priority. So that's how Apple was able to do multiple products. But I think, you know, especially if you're a smaller team, you really just have to do one thing.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like you can't even have multiple priorities.
Yeah.
It's like you've got to do that one thing. Otherwise, you're not gonna be able to make the impact that you're seeking to make.
Yeah, and I would share a personal story here. I worked at a company in San Francisco that had so much potential, but was just trying to do way too many things. And the lesson I took from that in my next company and after that was acquired, my new company, it's all about the art of focusing and saying what really matters right now and sticking to it and not being distracted. And it's so easy to get into adjacent businesses almost half asleep. And you wake up and go, oh, geez, we got a business here, but geez, it's a bit distracting and we're not focused on the core business. I think there's a lot to that. And do you know what's really powerful, Chad, is that, you know, as much as Steve is focused on Apple, he does cast his eye around the world. And we have this hilarious clip coming up. And it's actually Mike Parker, who's the CEO of Nike, and he's recounting this call that he got from Steve Jobs. And if you want an example of Steve Jobs emphasizing to someone focus, saying no, and focusing on what really matters, this next clip is perfect. So let's have a listen now to Nike CEO Mike Parker recounting his conversation with Steve Jobs and getting some timely advice.
You mentioned last night when we were having dinner that when you first got the job as CEO, you got a call from Steve Jobs and he offered you some advice.
Well, he didn't call to offer me advice, but we had worked together on a Nike-Apple collaboration called Nike Plus. So we took what Apple knows, what Nike knows, and brought a new technology to the market. Anyway, long story short, he said, "Hey, congratulations, it's great, you're going to do a great job." I said, "Well, do you have any advice?" And he said, "No, you're great." And then there was a pause, and he goes, "Well, I do have some advice." He goes, "Nike makes some of the best product in the world. I mean, product that you lust after, absolutely beautiful, stunning product. But you also make a lot of crap." He said, "Just get rid of the crappy stuff and focus on the good stuff." And then I expected a little pause and a laugh, but there was a pause but no laugh at the end. Yeah. And he was absolutely right. And in fact, that's one of my major focal points in terms of my priorities as a CEO and even as a designer when I was growing up at the company, is to edit. I mean, we have so many ideas. Nike is an idea factory.
Yeah, coming back to saying no. And again, I think Steve Jobs is kind of the lead editor inside of Apple. That, I mean, he even said in our last show that his main job is to go and meet with teams.
Yes.
And I'm sure kind of look around the room, take all the ideas and pick the one idea, the best idea in that group and say, focus on that, do that.
But don't you think it's hilarious? I think there's probably only one person in the world that can ring up the Nike CEO and say, dude, stop making the crap. Just stick to the good stuff. And it's so funny. Parker readily admits, yeah, well, we kind of did it and it worked. Don't you find that just brilliant? Like, this guy was fearless in many ways, wasn't he?
Yeah. It was also, you can hear Steve Jobs through Mike Parker. The way that Mike Parker tells the story, like, those are Steve's words coming out of his mouth. The way he's talking about, you make some of the best product, the most beautiful, well-designed product, but some of it is like, that's, again, it's kind of the harsh critic, maybe a little rub you the wrong way critic, to some side of Apple. But that is definitely who he was and what he did. And I think his greatest value to the company was his ability not only to edit himself, but to help others edit themselves.
Yeah. And it all flows from this one place. Like, it's pretty simple. And that is we love a product that is elegant and delights us, that helps us get jobs done, that surprises us. It almost feels a little bit magical. And the thing we hate more than anything is getting home, unpacking the box, trying to make the thing work, and realizing, that feeling, Chad, oh my gosh, I think I've just bought a big piece of crap here. This is just not going to work. Have you ever had that? I mean, it just, right?
Yeah, you definitely get what you pay for. And this idea of editing is, I'm sure there are so many products that have gotten to the cusp of release to the public and were killed at the last minute inside of Apple because something didn't work. It wasn't right. The customer experience wasn't going to be perfect.
And I have an example.
Yeah? What's that?
Well, do you remember the HomePod came out half a year late, the Apple speaker, because they couldn't get it right. And I'll tell you another one. There's one currently, the Apple wireless charger, which they actually showcased, has never launched. And I believe he showed that, I don't want to say it's a year ago, but they said it would launch this year. They showed it last year, if I get it right. It's called AirPower or something. And I would love one because it's a wireless dock that does your iPhone X, your Apple Watch, your AirPods, all of which products I own. And it would charge them all simultaneously at one time. And the rumor is that they can't get it to evenly distribute power to each of the three devices simultaneously. It was, I'm looking here, it was announced September 17. And so we are coming up almost on a year and we ain't got nada. And I think that's so true. Just do not release a half-baked product because you really only get one chance to do it right. And starting from a fail almost is impossible to come back from. And I just love that Apple hold themselves to that level because there's just so few companies that truly hold themselves to that level. I think Dyson, the vacuum manufacturer, is one. Can you think of any other companies that you've come across in life, maybe Patagonia, that just ship good product every single time?
Yeah, I think BMW comes to mind.
That's a good one. I think Belkin, the accessories maker, tends to get it right most of the time, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few out there. Bose, I think, is another.
But think about it, Chad, we're going to get maybe to 10 or 12 companies. That's it in the universe that we can truly go, yeah, they always ship good stuff. So,
yeah. Well, and we've got a great clip from Steve really kind of reinforcing what we've been talking here about really just getting the product right.
I can tell you what our goal is. Our goal is to make the best personal computers in the world and to make products we are proud to sell and would recommend to our family and friends. And we want to do that at the lowest prices we can. But I have to tell you, there's some stuff in our industry that we wouldn't be proud to ship, that we wouldn't be proud to recommend to our family and friends. And we can't do it. We just can't ship junk. So there are thresholds that we can't cross because of who we are. And what you'll find is our products are usually not premium priced. You go and price out our competitors' products, and you add the features that you have to add to make them useful, and you'll find in some cases they are more expensive than our products. The difference is we don't offer stripped down, lousy products. We just don't offer categories of products like that. But if you move those aside and compare us with our competitors, I think we compare pretty favorably. And a lot of people have been doing that and saying that now for the last 18 months.
Yeah. The way he sets that up for me is like, I want to make stuff that I can recommend to family and friends. And it's simple, but if we all thought about the things that we create as things that they speak so much about us, so we should take enormous pride in them and have the self-discipline not to ship junk. And so many times you open an app and you're like, oh my gosh, did they not think about this functionality? Or you get back from the store and things are clunky and unthought through. And what's really interesting is, often Apple is criticized for being so expensive, but I think he makes a really good point. Once you sort of fix subpar products to actually behave and perform at a certain standard, the Apple product doesn't look so bad in terms of affordability. And I tell you, the one thing, Chad, that goes for all my Apple products, especially iPads and MacBook Pros, is they last forever. So I'm
7 years into my MacBook Pro that I'm recording with you on here today. It's, I think, lasted 3 times longer than any of my previous computing products in my entire life, and I've been using computers, before I could walk.
Yeah, that's an epic 7 years. I recently got upgraded through work, and it's a little bit better, and it's the MacBook is like maybe 2 or 3 years on from my old one, but I even sometimes get on my old one and I'm really quite happy, and I notice a little bit of a difference, but nothing that significant. And when you think about what you and I create on our laptops for this show, for our work, if you think about all the things that it performs and you amortize the $3,000 or $4,000, $5,000, whatever it is, if you work it out on a per day basis, you're paying 50 cents a day or something ridiculously low like this. Like, it's really,
it's a no-brainer.
I mean, could you imagine the ROI on the 7 years of your MacBook Pro? I mean, that is the gold standard for high quality products.
I've made hundreds of thousands of dollars from my, I think I paid $3,500 for this machine. So
that is
it's insane. But I want to go back to this idea of we have standards, is what Steve Jobs said. So how can we as creators, Mike, like, how do we go about setting a bar? And how do we keep ourselves accountable to not shipping something that doesn't, go above that threshold? This is a very interesting idea that I haven't thought of kind of literally in that way, but just kind of thinking about it now, it's like, if I'm telling and sharing stories, I think the bar for me is that I need to see an emotional reaction and change or shift in the audience that I'm sharing the work with. If it's not doing that, then it's not worth shipping. What is that for you? And how would you go about setting that bar and kind of holding yourself accountable to that? Because I think that's the lesson I'm taking away from this. We don't ship junk clip from Steve.
Yeah. So I think about that in a interesting way. So I frame and I attempt to, and once again, I say this as a humble student of life who fails more than I succeed. I just try, the thing that makes me feel good is when I do something that has an aha in it for whoever is the recipient. So if, earlier this evening I was coaching, doing some one-on-one skills coaching with a very good rugby player. And I was really mindful, okay, this guy has played semi-professional rugby, and I have an obligation. He's spending 90 minutes to train with me and to get my coaching. I need to give him something. Like, I feel an obligation to make it worth his while. Just like if I'm making this podcast, I got to find one thing for a listener. I got to find one thing for you, Chad, that makes you go, that's really cool. I hadn't thought of it like that. I feel like everything I do, every meeting that I have, I'm looking for a gift for the person on the other side. For me, that's the standard. And it's not only on the podcast, but I think that equally goes, I would even apply that to both my son and my wife. Every time we're doing something together, I want it to be enjoyable or meaningful or something that is a gift in it, whether it's, good advice for my son or just supporting my wife as she renovates our house. It doesn't really matter. To me, that's standards. It's when you allow yourself mediocrity and say, geez, what did I actually contribute of recent? And when you can't answer that question, that's when you're in trouble. So I think of this podcast as like, look, if someone can listen to this and out of 60 minutes, one of those minutes helps them do a bit better today in the office, for me, that's a standard. That's a win. And maybe we can get that up to 2 aha moments or 3 or 4, but at least 1. I think that's the most practical. I think that's the most meaningful standard because you can just apply it to everything.
Yeah, you're really kind of touching on this idea that author Adam Grant writes about in his book, Give and Take.
Yes.
This idea.
Excellent. Yeah.
I'm absolutely of the same mindset that I think we are all, as a society, better off with that giving mindset and being sure that we're providing value and insight for others and know that, it's going to come back around in some way, shape, or form in the karmic universe.
Yeah, totally.
But that's really the way.
But
the way to go.
I think we can all just try and say, can I do something in this conversation or this meeting or this moment or in this activity that really contributes? People talk about creates value or impact, however you want to frame it. But for me, it's as simple as if someone has a business meeting with me or listens to a podcast or does rugby training with me, regardless of that format, whoever was in that with me, I do what I can. I attempt to create some tangible value, some thing that takes them further, that grows them, that develops them, that helps them, that gets them along the way to their mission. And as a standard, then from, it all is good in the world. If you just do it one time every meeting, even if you think about those interactions over a week, that could be like 10 good deeds in the week. And, last time I checked, there's 52 weeks in the year. So that sort of compounds, really, really nicely. So I think it's this idea of having a standards. Don't ship junk. Don't accept mediocrity. And, the PC world was full of mediocrity. And Steve took it from this beige box of boring, cheap and nasty to almost luxury products, things that are coveted. And by the way, your MacBook Pro is 7 years on the job with a phenomenal ROI. That to me is pretty much all you need to know about innovation. That's like, I remember those old Dell PCs used to last. You remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, you would have like a Win 2000 machine for a year, maybe 18 months, and then the thing would
yeah. My high school, college years were real rough. I think I always had at least 2 computers because one would always be acting up or breaking down, needing to be repaired. Both the ones that I built myself and also the ones I had some Dell Inspirons, I had some HP laptops. Yeah, they were just.
Do you remember the days when you had
atrocious.
to defrag the hard drive all the time?
I think I was reformatting my entire machine and reinstalling Windows on about a monthly basis.
Oh my gosh.
It was that bad.
Oh my gosh.
So Mike, we've done 6 clips on innovation, and we have still some clips to come.
Maybe the best to come, Chad. I'm honestly.
What do you think about kind of doing a little bit of a lightning round where we play these clips and kind of just choose our one favorite part of the clip and how we how we're going to take this inspiration from Steve and maybe apply it? Because we've got some great clips, but we could probably punt and do even yet a third show, as you said, on Steve. But I would really want to deliver the goods here in this show.
No, that's probably really good advice for us, Chad, because we got some big ones. We've got Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, coming in with some thoughts. We got Steve himself, and it's very much on the philosophies and how he approached life, not just work, but how he approached life. I just want to mention here, look, obviously this idea of having courage to bet on the future, to think deeply about that, and to just be resilient and focusing on what really matters was absolutely the theme of how they built these amazing products at both Apple.
No.
What?
And saying no.
Oh, yeah. It's all about that no with a big capital N. So that sets us up. Okay, we got the product. We know how from the last show, the business strategy and the history. What's truly remarkable about Steve is these next 4 clips, because the way in which he had thought about the world and saw the world, there's some really big stuff coming. And you were very lucky, and you actually got hold of some of his most powerful speeches ever. And you've handpicked 1 or 2. So do you want to set this up and roll us in?
Yeah, he gave a commencement speech to Stanford in 2005, I believe it was. And, kind of his famous, some of his most famous words are from that. But it's a great speech. He tells just really 3 simple stories. And this story is kind of his time at Reed College and how that experience, he was a dropout and whatnot. But eventually, things worked out for him. And well, here, I'll just let him tell the story.
And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference.
Curiosity. Geez, I kind of, you don't even get me started on that one. I believe that curiosity is the passport to thinking differently. That's what I take from this. And, life's experiences that you get from that curiosity can just come back in the most unexpected and delightful ways. And, talk about, a tip of the hat to the well-rounded Renaissance man. This is just brilliant, don't you think?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a precursor to this idea that's become popular more recently of deliberate practice. Steve's saying here, follow your curiosity and go deep into your passions and trust that that exposure and experience will come together in the end. And yeah, there's like a little bit of blind faith in that too. He's like, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You just have to trust that they'll connect looking backwards. That's really what I'm taking away here. Is, in the ways that your passion for rugby and coaching and mentoring, I'm sure informs the way you lead and manage inside your company and work with clients. Like, it's all related. We just kind of have to trust that, for really going deep in what we love and being open to applying it to our business, that it's all going to work out.
Yeah. Well, you did that when you pivoted and switched your college degree and totally flipped it, didn't you?
Yeah, I was hardcore math and science for so many years. Yeah, until I was
said, "Hey, I'm going to be a filmmaker,"
19. And then I've been a storyteller ever since.
Yeah, and you don't get to where you are now if you don't put in a bit of elbow grease. Yes, there's the curiosity.
Yes,
but it takes a little bit of hard work as well, don't you think? I think that, you've got to just throw yourself at it. And actually, it's so funny that the founder of Oracle, Larry Ellison, was actually the neighbor of Steve Jobs in Silicon Valley. And he has these thoughts that he's going to share with us in this next clip, which is all about that hard work that was so signature to Steve Jobs.
Edison had this comment, it's 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Steve was a god of perspiration. I mean, Steve worked incredibly hard. It wasn't just his intellectual gifts, which were enormous, but how he took that horsepower and applied it tirelessly until the entire problem was solved. I've never seen anyone like that.
But was there something different about his ability to focus, or was it this control freak thing, or what?
Well, I'll tell you. Let's talk a little bit about Pixar. And Steve was my best friend for about 25 years. I think we knew him for about the same length of time. Very interesting how we met. We were neighbors in Woodside, and his peacock wandered onto my property and woke me up. Not the way to start a relationship in a practice. His girlfriend had given him a peacock, and I came over to complain about the peacock, said, "You don't like that bird either." It's not that he just put in the hour. If he had to stay up all night, if he had night after night after night, he would call me up and say, "Larry, let's get together." We saw each other a lot. He'd come over to my house. I'd go over to his house. I said, "Steve, I'm not coming over if you make me watch Toy Story again." I've watched 73 different versions of Toy Story. Now, I know the new version of Render Man is 4% better than the one I saw last week, but I'm not watching this thing again. So, Larry, you got to see. You won't believe the different the shadows look. But that was Steve until it was perfect.
That's really funny. I had no idea that Larry Ellison was kind of a test audience for Toy Story.
What's with the peacock stories? I mean, do you know anyone that owns a peacock? I mean, what is this?
I grew up next to a park that had peacocks, so I'm very familiar with the annoying calls of peacocks.
I was about to say, don't they make incredibly annoying sounds? Don't. But this clip does one thing though. While you're reminiscing on peacocks, let me just jump in here for a second and say, hard work. We've had this big theme on the show where people think everything is like Instagram or WhatsApp. It's like 2 years and you make a couple of billion. Baby. Almost every single person has talked about years, if not decades, of hard work before real success comes. And what's so great is that Steve, yes, he was smart, but he was prepared to work hard and right to the end, like get it right. Don't ship junk, ship perfection. And I love that Larry called this out, don't you?
Mm-hmm. the perspiration, applying the genius of Steve Jobs, I think that is kind of an assured way to success. Like, yes, you can be in the right place at the right time. Like the people building Instagram and the people building WhatsApp, they were in the right place at the right time. Yes, they worked hard and they built good or interesting product, but I would argue that they're even much better and more useful today than they were kind of, when they had their big acquisitions.
Yeah.
But
yes.
what Steve did was he's kind of guaranteeing the success by just working harder at it than everyone else.
Yeah. Because here's the truth, Chad. Most people don't work hard. And then you compile that, they don't work on things that they love, they don't work hard, and before you know it,
they don't work focused.
Yeah, exactly. I know this is meant to be a lightning round, but let me diverge for 1 second. This reminds me of, do you remember, the meme that goes around about once a year about here are the 10 things that don't require talent, right? And so I do want to just introduce this, though, because I know Steve Jobs had a brilliant mind, but there was so much about just focus and hard work here. And this is like people who win do these things. And this is the famous meme, 10 things that don't require talent but will guarantee success. Being on time, work ethic, effort, body language, energy, attitude, passion, being coachable, doing extra, being prepared. If you do these things, it is so much of what success is about. So don't be mistaken for a moment if you're listening to the show thinking, you just have to be some talismanic person like Steve Jobs. Hard work, focus, make some choices, and run with it. I mean, these are the themes that are coming back. It's not just be brilliant, is it?
Mm-hmm. It's funny, that list that you read off, it sounded kind of like my experience in the Boy Scouts of America. It's like almost the motto there.
I would tell you this is, I could take this and apply it to the office, to the rugby field, you name it, to scouts. It's like, go to Dale Carnegie and his great books. If you look at most self-help, self-improvement books, they'll cover themes like this.
Yeah, and I think the personal anecdotiness of this clip is really telling, because here's two founders of billion-dollar companies that when they get together, Steve's like, no. Like, I really want to show you the latest cut of this movie that we've been working on for 7 years. And Larry's like, Steve, just like, can't we just like have a drink together, or can't we just get a good meal or something? It's just like, but that's all he wanted to do was just show him the latest cut, because he was that obsessed with making it the best that it could be.
Yeah. But the other thing that comes back time and time again on our show is, having courage and being relentless, putting yourself out there. I think about the choice that Branson made to go and get a chalkboard and walk around saying 25 quid return flight to this island when the BA flight was cancelled. You have to not only have leaps of faith, but you just have to jump into the unknown. And this next clip from Steve is all about, what most people don't do is they don't take these leaps of faith because they're scared of what will happen. And this is his advice to people who face that moment.
No, I've actually always found something to be very true, which is most people don't get those experiences because they never ask. I've never found anybody that didn't want to help me if I asked them for help. I always call them up. I called up... this will date me, but I called up Bill Hewlett when I was 12 years old, and he lived in Palo Alto. His number was still in the phone book, and he answered the phone himself. He said, yes? He said, hi, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter, and I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard, working on the assembly line, putting nuts and bolts together on frequency counters. He got me a job in the place that built them. And I was in heaven. And I've never found anyone who said no or hung up the phone when I called. I just asked. And when people ask me, I try to be as responsive, to pay that debt of gratitude back. most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act. And you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn, with people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.
Ouch. That one kind of hits me personally, just kind of where I'm at right now in my business. It's just because I can feel, you get that physical sensation of, oh, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do that. I don't want to make that call. I don't want to send that email. I don't want to, I don't want to approach that client or prospect.
Yeah.
I'm taking that one to heart here today.
Yeah. Well, that's the power of the advice, isn't it? Don't be afraid. And, you'll remember when we talked about risk in our live Bucharest show, our guest, Iwan Jakob, was just saying, risk is not what you think it is. And, there's those devices. Remember those devices he gave us on how he's not afraid to fail? He's like, well, what's the risk really? I mean, what's the worst could happen here? And the fact that you're alive now means you've taken risks before and survived. So what's to lose? Yeah. I will tell you that I have found when you have that feeling, the quicker you jump into action and get over it, the better. When I was 17, I rang one of the best radio stations in the city and said, I'll come and intern every school holidays and work for free. And they were like, really? And I went, yep. And do you know what? Everyone said to me when I was 17, I can't believe you're 17 and you're working on like the coolest radio station in town. And no one had rung up and asked, Yeah. When I look back in life, there are these moments where you're just like, go for it. Just go for it. You'll be alive after, whether it works or not. But there's this thought which is like the weight of regret is 10 times that of failure. And I have always found that a very powerful thought.
Yeah. It's so funny. Like Steve's inspiring me to kind of revisit this book I read quite some time ago called The 5-Second Rule, where kind of a way to overcome this. It's you don't need to read the book. This is the book here. It's just when you're faced with that gut feeling of, oh, I don't want to do that, or I'm afraid, you just count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you say go out loud. You don't have to count out loud, but you say go out loud, and then you just do it. You do whatever that thing is that you didn't want to do, and it kind of hacks your brain to just do it.
Oh yeah, and I have found in my life that when I've had this feeling, sheesh, I really got to do that thing, I now have enough failures when I've had that feeling and not acted on it that I can't bear that feeling anymore, because I'm like, oh, premonition, I know it's going to get so much worse if I don't do this. So being afraid to fail, jumping off and making those calls, doing those things, or just doing hard things, things that we're like, ugh, I don't really want to do that. Just like remember what happens when when you defer.
Yeah.
It just always comes back to get you, doesn't it?
Yeah. And speaking of failures, like how about getting kicked out of the company that you founded?
I mean, that's the thing here, right? Yeah. He got booted out of Apple and had a 10-year sabbatical, I think is the best way to call it.
It was an exile in a way.
Yeah. What a dramatic story. I mean, talk about the hero's journey. I mean, this is right up there, isn't it?
Yeah. And going back to Steve's commencement speech here with this last and final clip, he frames it as one of the best things that happened to him. This kind of builds on his clip of, you can only connect the dots going backwards. Like, so of course he's going to say that because he had this kind of triumphant return and turnaround of Apple afterwards. But he really leaned into the freedom that he had after getting fired from Apple. And so here's Steve talking about taking that freedom and not settling, even after arguably the worst thing in his career that ever happened had just taken place.
How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love, and that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking, don't settle.
Steve Jobs bringing it in for the commencement speech. I mean, pretty wise old reflections and, you know, pretty humble really when you think of how the likes of, you know, Elon and what's the T-Mobile CEO, all these guys running around. Nobody comes close to the impact of Steve, but I thought that was pretty candid and some powerful reflections, like don't settle for okay in life. Don't settle for stuff that's just moi. Like go for it. Follow your dreams. And Chad, the way I process this is live the life that you dream of. Live the life that you sit there dreaming on the bus, on the train, in the car, or walking to work. If you're dreaming of a way life should be, I would just encourage everyone to do everything in their power to make that a reality and not just a dream.
Yeah, I kind of take maybe a little more stoic view on it and kind of living each day as if it were my last. Sometimes I'm good at that, and sometimes I'm not. But as my business has transformed over the last 10 years, I think it is very much a gradual discovery and reinvestment into the parts of the business that I really love, the activities that I love, the clients that I love, the creative partners that I love, you know, which includes you, Mike.
Right back at you.
It's in a way too. It's kind of like that focusing. You know, it's like, hey, say no to the things that you don't love. Do the things that you do love, and you know you might make a good run of it. And that's what this last clip from Steve is.
Yeah. And what's so remarkable, Chad, is this is a guy who pulled off killer strategies for the Pixar IPO. This is the guy that knows when to partner instead of bill, who sees the market, who loves companies to be run by ideas. This is a guy who rings up the Nike CEO and says, dude, stop making the crap stuff. This is quite remarkable. I mean, we filled 2 shows and we
almost
still have
150 minutes here.
Yeah, and we've got stuff that we couldn't get into this show. I mean, it's just, I encourage everyone to go back to moonshots.io and keep revising, revisiting, and looking through these insights to work out which ones work for you. And as you're doing that, the good news is we've got 2 more Apple episodes coming up, Chad. What do you think? I think it's about time that we look at next week. I think we need to look at Mr. Tim Cook, the current CEO of Apple, who's overseen some of the greatest profits in American corporate history. Is he merely an operator or is he an innovator?
I don't know. We'll have to wait for the next episode to find out.
Exactly. And I think to bring this all together as a little taster of what's to come, I think we're going to pull together a couple of thoughts from each of our Apple executives. So, you know, we mentioned, we've got Jonathan Ive. Yeah. Angela Arendt, Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, Tim. We're going to kind of create an ensemble of the best of Apple as a sort of innovators toolkit for the episode after Tim Cook. So there's plenty of good stuff coming down the pipe for all our listeners. And I think we should mention this. I think are you still up for doing after our Apple series, the Hot or Not Innovators show, where we make the showdown, Chad? You still up for that?
Yeah. We've still got things like biggest innovation failures and kind of some innovation writers. Yeah, we've got some great series planned coming up.
And we'll have some more guests that I'm working on to join the show. And for the Hot or Not show, we got Tesla, Facebook, Twitter, WeWork, and Microsoft are going to come under the microscope. In your mind, Chad, Tesla, Facebook, Twitter, WeWork, Microsoft, has there been any movements that you're seeing that might sway you on the hot or not side of things?
Oh, I don't know. I'm kind of in tech hype fatigue here.
Oh, okay.
I think we have to put like crypto or Bitcoin or something on that list too.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
A whole episode in and of itself. Or that might be too controversial.
Yeah. Well, I would say this. I think Facebook have got themselves out of a little bit of hot water that they were in at the beginning of the year. However, I'm not so sure good about WeWork and Tesla. I think some pretty big question marks, maybe even storm clouds are above those two companies.
They're making big bets. You know, whether they're going to pay off or not kind of remains to be seen.
True indeed. So there's so much to come. The next show, obviously, Tim Cook, lots to go into there. And he's, wow. There's so much to get into with that. We've learned so much from Steve Jobs. What would you like all of our listeners to do as we go on this journey together? Chad, what's your call to action for them?
Say no to the things that you don't love.
Boom shakalaka. I think that's a great way to end the show. So there you have it. The wisdom in the last two shows from Mr. Steve Jobs, founder of Apple Inc. and CEO of Pixar and just general legend. So much inspiration, so much wisdom. Chad, I want to thank you. It's been a cracker of a show. And you sound very perky when we do the call in your morning. So we might stay here for perky Chad. What do you reckon?
Yeah, well, I reserve my mornings for all of my creative activities.
I can feel that.
So we may have to work on the schedule here.
That's okay. I can do the late night shift. That's no problem. It will be better when I have my studio in my house, which is being renovated at the moment. But for now, I am the sole inhabitant of the office. So I got the run of the place, so I can do all sorts of crazy stuff here at the office. But thank you again. This was really fun to do Steve Jobs. I learned a ton, and I'm so curious to what we're going to find next week when we dive into the world of Tim Cook, the last of our Apple executives.
Yeah, and thank you, listeners, for sticking with us for 2 shows, which could probably have been stretched to 4. Mike and I, we've given you a little sneak peek into what we're thinking about as far as next shows. You can always go to moonshots.io and find our latest list of past episodes, and we've even got a preview list of shows to come. We're always looking for your feedback, innovators and companies that you would like us to dive into, research and profile here on the show. And we love your feedback and ratings on iTunes. You can find all that at moonshots.io.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Chad. Thank you to all our listeners. That's the end of the Steve Jobs series, and we wish you well on your sunrises or your sundowns. Thanks again, and that's a wrap from the Moonshot Podcast.